Hey, what's going on? So TD Jakes, he made a powerful statement. He says, we train men to be silent and then we crave them to speak. And I find that very interesting because one of the things that I think that we struggle with and that we've seen men struggling with in our recent generation is this issue of not being able to open up and express ourselves, not being able to express our emotions. And oftentimes we're seeing a lot of men that are struggling with having low emotional intelligence. And so on today's live, I want to talk about an article that I just ran across and dive into this article about men with low emotional intelligence and the 10 behaviors that they display. So men with low emotional intelligence display these 10 behaviors without realizing it. So let's dive into it if you're ready to learn with me. Number one, men oftentimes with low emotional intelligence, they struggle to express their feelings. Now, this is a huge one, I think, because I realize that as a man, because growing up, a lot of times we weren't given the ability to express our emotions, the opportunity in certain environments to express our emotions and be seen. I realize that we oftentimes have this difficulty and this struggle with being willing to express our emotions when it comes to how we're feeling. I think that when we look at it, one of the challenges that we face and that we kind of see happening when it comes to our feelings is this issue of not being able to identify exactly what it is that we're feeling and we're dealing with. So last year I had tried this experiment and it was for about 90 days. I sat and I said, you know what? I want to learn, because I was working on emotional intelligence, my own personal emotional intelligence. I said, I wanted to learn and understand what it is I was feeling and really learn how to identify how I was feeling. So in this experiment, I found this app. It was called the How We Feel app. And I'll make sure I put down in the description below, I'll make sure that I put down a link to that app in the description below. But it was a How We Feel app. And in this app, what it was throughout the day, what it would do is that it would send me an alert on my phone, random times. It could be in the morning time, could be in the afternoon time, could be in the evening, whenever it was. But it was a check-in for me to check in with how I was feeling at that time and at that given moment. And what was phenomenal and what was just fascinating about this whole experiment to me is that as I'm going through this experiment, I'm realizing that every time my phone would ding and tell me that, you know, it was time for me to, check in or whatever the case is, I would go into this app. And the way this app was set up was it had 4 different quadrants. And in one quadrant, it would say, high energy, pleasant feelings. And then it would say in this lower quadrant, low energy, pleasant feelings. And then in this other quadrant, it would say high energy, negative feelings, low energy, negative feelings. And as you would click on one of the quadrants, it would expand and there would be all these different emotions that you would see based on the quadrant that you were in. And so what was crazy about that to me, and what was so fascinating about that to me, was the fact that as you would expand this one quadrant, there were all these different emotions that you were able to identify. And so I know for myself, kind of growing up, I only thought that there was like a handful of emotions that you feel, happy, sad, angry, mad, whatever you want to look at. But it was very limited in my understanding of the different emotions that I was feeling. And so as I was going through that experiment, one of the things that I recognized and I started learning was that as I was having these situations that were happening throughout the day, being able to go into this app and being able to really drill down exactly what I was feeling started helping me to navigate and to respond a lot better and to respond a lot more constructively and a lot more healthy in these situations. So It could have been, a situation that happened between me and my wife, and maybe I was feeling a certain way, and I'd open up this app, and then I'm thinking that I'm feeling angry. I'm thinking that I'm feeling a certain way, but then I go in and I start investigating, and I start realizing, dang, like, nah, there's like a whole bunch of different other things that are going on here. And it helped me to learn how to identify what I was feeling. And so in this first issue, they talk about this first behavior on our struggle on how to express our feelings. That's what a lot of the issue comes down to, is that the fact that sometimes and oftentimes as men, we don't know how to identify these emotions, and we don't know how to identify these feelings. So therefore we don't know how to act and respond accordingly. We don't know how to act and respond in a healthy way, in a productive way, rather than it being a destructive way, or rather than it being an impulsive way. And so with this, I realized that this was one of the behaviors that I know that I was facing, and going through that experiment, it really helped me to learn how to identify how I was feeling. And I might do a video on that. I might just kind of talk about some of the results and some of the things that I learned out of doing that, because it helped me to also clear up a lot of the confusion that I had in my mind about my emotions and how I was feeling. It helped me to express myself in different ways, helped me to set boundaries in different ways. And that's really where it kind of started, right? So number 2, it says, excuse me, that they're not great at empathy. They're not great at empathy. So it says here that men with low EQ find it hard to understand or share the feelings of others, which make their interactions seem cold and unfeeling. So my last job that I was at, I had the opportunity to work at a cemetery as a counselor at a cemetery. And I got to tell you, that was probably one of the most, it was probably one of the most eye-opening and interesting jobs that I've ever been in my whole life. I mean, when you sit down with somebody that has lost a loved one on a day-to-day basis, I mean, it really opens up your eyes. It opened up my eyes as a man at how much I lack empathy. And what I mean by that is, like I said, we're sitting down with people. I was sitting down with people every single day, and I was walking people through and guiding people through, for a lot of them, some of the most difficult and challenging moments of their life. I mean, some of the most difficult and challenging. I remember one of the first, I remember one of the first families that I helped and I worked with. And it was a daughter. The daughter came in, and her mom had passed away. And immediately, in listening to this young lady and listening to how she described her family, I could tell how close they really were, and how close her and her mom were. This lady, she was probably in her early 30s. Her mom died unexpectedly. I think she may have gotten COVID, got out of the hospital, everything was fine, but then she just deteriorated like really fast, and it was really unexpected. Came out of nowhere. And man, I'm gonna tell you, like, sitting there having to help somebody through that was one of the hardest things I had to do, because this was, like I said, this was right in the beginning of me getting into this field and understanding like what this process was like. And I've pastored before and been in a role where you're helping people through difficult things and helping them through challenges, but this was just like on a whole different level for me, because what can you say to somebody that has lost somebody that they love like that? I can't bring them back. I can't fix the situation. I can't fix anything in that scenario. Somebody comes to you having a problem financially or having a problem within a relationship, you can work on those things. You can, come up with some solutions. And this was a situation where you can't come up with any solutions. There's nothing you can come up with. And in that moment, I just remembered sitting with this young lady, and I mean, the only thing I could just do was like cry with this lady. Like that was it, man. Like, I mean, I was just so I struggled so much as to understanding like how she was feeling. I know to an extent I couldn't. My mom is still alive, and so I understood, you know, that to an extent it was hard for me to understand what this woman was going through. But you know, as a man, I really struggled with being able to put myself in her shoes and really being able to help understand what she was going through and kind of help her work through this process. And that job and that career and being in that field, man, it really helped me to understand how important it is to be empathetic and how important it is to be able to put myself in somebody else's shoes. And I feel like as a man, a lot of times that's hard for us as men, because if I can't identify, think about it, if I can't identify how I'm feeling and the things that I have going on inside of me, then how can I really identify something that you're feeling as something that you're going through? And so I had to learn how to work through those things, and I had to learn how to work with people where they're at and what they're going through and the season that they're in and the experience that they're dealing with. And I think that when you look at the, you know, men that have low emotional intelligence, it's hard for us to be able to do that because we just don't recognize what it is that they're feeling, because we don't recognize that same thing in ourselves. And so this is an eye-opening one for me, is that a lot of times the behavior in our behavior, we recognize that we're not great at empathy at all. Number 3 is that they often misinterpret social cues. They don't get the social cues. They don't get the message when things are kind of getting put down and people are in a certain way. And that ties right into the empathy, right? Ties to the empathy of not understanding where people are at, what they're going through. I remember even just not even on a serious note, but just socially in general. I remember me and my wife, we had went up to we were in Canada last year sometime, and she was performing at a festival out there, and we were out there, man, and I was in a great mood, man. I was just bouncing around. I mean, I'm in Canada, right? Canada, like everybody in Canada is nice and friendly. I don't know what it is, you know, but everybody was friendly and nice, and I was just in a great mood, man. And I'm bouncing around, and I'm like saying hello to everybody, waving, and my wife was like, "Yo, chill out, man. Like, you're doing a little too much." And I'm like, "What do you mean I'm doing a little?" Like, I was offended by it, you know? And she's like, "Nick, you're 6'5", big black man walking around in Canada. Like, you need to chill, man. Like, pick up on what some of these other people are giving off as far as the cues that they're giving you." And it was an eye-opener for me, because I always thought that I was, you know, really good at picking up those cues, but I recognized that in that situation and during that time period, I wasn't picking up on a lot of social cues, man. And it had to do with just my lack of emotional intelligence and understanding what's going on, understanding how people are feeling, understanding the vibe, right? Understanding the vibe in a room. Sometimes we don't pick up on that, and we misinterpret, or we completely oftentimes miss some of the social cues that people are giving us, and that is caused by us not being able to identify like what's going on, not identifying what's going on within ourselves, right? We miss those things, and we can't observe correctly the cues that other people are giving us, right? So number four, had the wrong thing. Number 4, they might have a short emotional fuse. They might have a short emotional fuse. Now, I think that this makes sense because a lot of times when we look at it, men, a lot of us wrestle with anger. We wrestle with our tempers. We wrestle with being quick-tempered. We wrestle with not knowing how to process our anger and not knowing how to channel that anger in a healthy way. You know, the Bible talks about in the book of Proverbs over and over and over again, this issue of us being able to handle our anger, being able to deal with our anger, being able to deal with our frustrations and not allowing them to take us over, and not allowing them to not allowing ourselves to display these aggressive behaviors because of that anger. Bible tells us that a man that can't control his anger, control himself, is like a city without walls, right? It's just wide open. It tells us not to go to sleep with wrath and in our wrath, right? To be able to learn how to process that and to be able to learn really how to deal with those things. And so here we have it where, you know, when we have that low emotional intelligence, a lot of times it shows up in these short emotional fuses. I mean, you think about our our society right now, and we're seeing a lot of things happen. We're seeing a lot of situations happen. We're seeing a lot of situations and a lot of things happen in our society right now, revolving or involving a lot of men that this is the case, right? The emotional fuses are so short, man. You know, when I'm out in public, I'm you know, I second guess like confronting somebody if something happens, because like I'm not sure if I'm ready for how this person is going to respond. You know, I'm not sure if I am feeling safe enough in a situation to confront or to speak up, because of the way that we're seeing a lot of these things happen in our society with men with really short fuses. You know, in this article, it says that factually speaking, people with lower emotional intelligence tend to have higher levels of stress and anger. It's as if their emotional thermostat is set a bit too high, heating up faster than it cools down. And this is an issue that it oftentimes comes from us being not able to recognize and identify the emotions that we're feeling. And because we don't know how to recognize and identify them, we don't know how to respond in a healthy way. And so having that having that short emotional fuse is number 4. Number 5, they may struggle with forming deep connections. So how does this kind of play out in ourselves? When you think about it, everything in our lives, it revolves around relationship. You know, when I think about the fact that everything is going to pass away, man, houses going to pass away, cars we're going to get rid of, you know, jobs we're going to, you know, new careers, all these different things are going to come and they're going to go. But relationships are one of the things that we're going to have to face and we're going to have to deal with and we're going to have to embrace for the entirety of our lives. And the reason why men struggle with forming these deep connections is that oftentimes it's challenging because we can't understand our own emotions. And because we can't understand our own emotions, it's hard for us to understand the emotions of someone else. And this makes it really hard for us as men to be able to share our emotional intimacy with others. Emotional intimacy is what builds and strengthens deep connections with other people. And so if I don't know how I'm feeling, and therefore I can't understand how somebody else is feeling, then I am challenged in forming that emotional intimacy with another person. And so, you know, going back to like what I was talking about with working at the cemetery, one of the things that I also recognized in that career was, you know, sitting down with individuals that had been married for like a long time. Like I'm talking about, you know, 50, 60 years, and their spouse passes away. And recognizing how important relationships are and how important forming these deep connections are with other people, and how much, you know, it would throw me off so many times when I would go to a funeral and I'm sitting there and like nobody shows up. Like nobody's there. I mean, the funeral director's there. We're gonna, hey, just put them in the ground. No family shows up. no loved one shows up. And it used to always blow my mind. I'd be like, man, how is it that you could live a life that long and not be able to form some deep connections where you have somebody show up to your funeral? You have somebody show up to wish you farewell. And that always stood out to me. And I feel like when we look at our low emotional intelligence and the lack of our emotional awareness, this is one of the big fears that even in my own life that I think about is, not getting to the end of life and not having those deep connections and those deep relationships that you can share with somebody else. And so men, oftentimes with low emotional intelligence, they struggle and they have that challenge of finding those deep connections with others. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and there was two guys that were on there. One was, they were in their maybe early 40s, probably same age as me. And one of the brothers, he said something interesting. He said, as we get older as men, it seems like it's harder for us to build connections and to build friendships with other people. And that stuck out to me. I said, man, it shouldn't be that way, right? You think about it, as we get older as men, because we've experienced life more, because we've seen more things, we should be in a place where we can share that wisdom, share that experience with other people, and really build those connections. But if we don't have that emotional intelligence, it's going to be hard for us to do that, right? So let's move on. Number 6. Number 6, they avoid emotionally charged situations. They avoid emotionally charged situations. Now, this makes a lot of sense for us because, you think about it, when we have situations that are involving a lot of emotions, that puts us as men, especially when we don't know what we're feeling, right? Especially if we don't know what's going on internally with us, man, that puts us in some really uncomfortable spaces, some uncomfortable situations. So as a man, I know, speaking from my own experience, as a man, when my emotional intelligence was low and it was something that I was working on, I realized like there were oftentimes situations that I just didn't want to get involved in because I didn't want to have to deal with the emotions that were involved in all of that situation. Like, I'm like, okay, I don't know what's going on over there, but I'm not trying to be a part of it because this is bringing up things inside of me, is bringing up things in other people that I'm seeing that I don't know how to identify. And if I don't know how to identify, I don't know how to move. I don't know how to navigate in this situation. And this all keeps tying back to our whole issue of knowing how to identify those emotions, right? So when I don't know how to identify, I don't know how to move, man. I don't know how to navigate. I don't know how to take control of a situation. I don't know how to be involved in a situation without kind of putting myself out there. There's all these different things that end up happening. This happened to me actually just the other night. I was with my son, and we had just watched a movie, and it's something about the movie, it just had him scared, had him upset. We were getting ready to go to bed. He started crying. He was just like, really just upset about having to go to bed and having to think about like what he saw in the movie and having these bad dreams and these different things. And so it was an emotionally charged situation just because he was crying, he was upset. And as a man, my first response was like, yo, what are you crying about? Like, come on, man, like, let's snap out of it. That was my initial response in my mind. That's not what I did and not what I said, because I've been learning, and I'm like, okay, let me slow down before I say anything, right? Let me slow down, take my time, process this before I speak up. But it was a situation where I didn't know how to handle myself in a mature way that would have helped my son work through this. And luckily my wife was there. She began working with him, asking him some questions, helping him to understand how he was feeling, what he was going through, why he was processing it that way. And she was able to work him down and able to get him, in a calm space. And as I was watching this, I started picking up things and understanding, okay, I can handle it this way. I can do it this way. And I recognized in that moment that it is important for me to be a male presence to help him to work through this, so he understands and he can understand how to identify what he is feeling as a young boy, and also identify and understand that there's nothing wrong with what he's feeling as a young boy. And so through that, even though it was an emotionally charged situation, I was able to work through that and help my son eventually kind of work through that. But oftentimes if we have low emotional intelligence, you know, our fuse is real short, and we don't want to have to deal with what this situation is bringing up and what is making me feel like and what the other person is feeling like. And so this is where the problem comes in, right? Where we don't want to dive into that because we don't know how to handle ourselves, and we don't know how to handle the people that are around us in there, right? So number 7, it says they have difficulty accepting criticism. Oh my goodness gracious, here we go. This is one that I would say, as a man, speaking as a man, that this for me was one of my biggest challenges. Difficulty accepting criticism. Difficulty accepting criticism. It says here that men with low emotional intelligence can find it incredibly tough to accept criticism, even if it's constructive. They might see it as an attack or a personal affront. It's like a punch in the gut to them, and they might react defensively or even aggressively. So for me, this was one of the big things that I worked on last year, especially in therapy. My therapist, he worked with me last year through a process called EMDR, and I'll make sure I put a link down below on some, you know, videos that help me to understand it. But EMDR is eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and what it is it takes a lot of our past traumatic experiences, and now we got to remember, right? Our present tension that we feel oftentimes is caused by our past traumatic experience. So that present tension that I have, the things that make me tense, that trigger me, that send me into certain spaces, oftentimes those things are connected to some of these past traumatic events and situations that we were in. So EMDR, what it does, and what my therapist did, was he worked with me on some of these past traumatic experiences, and he helped me to now, in the present moment, look at these things as an adult, not as a child, not as somebody stuck in that moment that was helpless and, you know, didn't know how to defend themselves, didn't know how to process it, but looking at it in real time and understanding how to process those things as an adult. And one of the main things that we worked on going through this process was my difficulty with receiving feedback and receiving criticism for others, because my past traumatic experiences made it feel that when somebody gave me feedback, when somebody criticized something that I was doing, that they were attacking me. They were attacking my self-worth. They were attacking who I am. They were attacking what it is that I did. They were attacking my capacity to learn, to whatever the case was. I always looked at feedback before this experience as something negative, as somebody wanting to hurt my character, my personality, and who I was as an individual, as a man. The Bible talks about this in Proverbs, that, you know, someone that cannot receive correction is worse than a fool, right? Is somebody that's worse than a fool, somebody that can't receive that correction and receive that feedback. And so for a lot of us as men, when we have low emotional intelligence, it is hard for us to receive feedback. It's hard for us to receive criticism, because when somebody gives us that criticism and somebody gives us that feedback, the emotions that come up and how we start feeling internally because of that feedback and because of that criticism, because we don't know how to identify them, we then don't know how to process them, right? So if you give me feedback and I don't know how to identify my emotions, then I'm going to give you pushback. I'm going to put up a wall. I'm going to be defensive, because I'm going to say, well, it's not me, it's you, because I just don't know how to deal with how I'm feeling based on what you're telling me. And so when we have these situations of low emotional intelligence, that's oftentimes our stance in here in when it comes to feedback. And so what I had to work through and what I learned through that experience with my therapist was that feedback actually helps me to grow. It helps me to grow. It helps me to build. It helps me to gain more wisdom. It helps me to become a better man. And part of that process that I had to learn was that when I got feedback, I learned how to handle the emotions that was coming with the feedback, right? Feedback always brings some type of emotion with it because it triggers something from my past, triggers something that I'm dealing with and struggling with now, whatever the case may be, but it's going to bring that emotion. And when I learn how to identify those emotions, increase my emotional intelligence, I can learn how to then handle feedback. But in this article, it's saying that one of the behaviors that we deal with is that we have difficulty accepting that criticism. Number 8, it says they often make impulsive decisions. People with low emotional intelligence tend to make more impulsive decisions because they struggle to process their emotions effectively. This might lead them to act on a whim, sometimes leading to regrettable outcomes. Think about this. When situations happen and I don't think about, or I can't think about the consequences down the future and how those consequences are going to affect those around me, how they're going to affect myself, it's easier for me to just make impulsive choices, impulsive decisions. I like what they say in this article. It says men with low EQ often make these decisions impulsively, and it's like they're driving at full speed without considering the traffic signals or road signs. So they're just flying by, like not even caring about who they hurt, what they say, who they impact, whatever the case may be. And oftentimes this is what happens when we have that low emotional intelligence, where, our emotions are trying to tell us something, they're trying to give us some direction, but because we don't know how to identify and process them, we make these decisions that oftentimes we end up regretting down the road. Number 9, they struggle with emotional boundaries. So think about this now. When I don't know how to process, or I don't know how to identify the emotions that I'm feeling, then I don't know how to set the proper boundaries. In every single relationship I have and every single situation that I have, I need to learn how to set my boundaries. I need to learn how to set my boundaries in my marriage. I need to learn how to set boundaries with my children. I need to learn how to set boundaries with my close friends. I need to learn how to, set boundaries within my career. But when I don't know how to identify like what I'm feeling, it's hard for me to be able to set those clear boundaries, because now the boundaries are always moving. If every time my wife does something and my only emotion that I can identify and that I can express is anger, then the boundaries are all over the place. It doesn't matter like what she does, because then if it makes me angry, I'm just gonna say, all right, well, that's just another boundary that I'm gonna put up. And how can you live with and deal with that when the boundaries are always moving, right? How can I build a relationship based on intimacy and based on growing together if I'm always moving the boundary because I don't know how I'm feeling and I can't express that to you? So last year when I did this experiment and I was working on identifying my own emotions and increasing my own emotional intelligence, it helped me tremendously in my marriage, because now when something would happen and it would cause a response in me and it would cause an emotion in me, and I was able to identify it and really get down to what was causing it, what it really was, rather than just chucking it into, the overall emotion and really starting to identify it, then it helped me to be able to identify those things that were causing me to feel like that. Then now I could go to my wife and say, hey, because I know she loves me, because I know she respects me, and because I know that now I'm able to identify what I'm feeling based on these certain things that are happening, I can now go to her with specifics and say, hey babe, when you do this, it causes me to act like this. It causes this emotion in me. It causes this feeling in me. And when I was able to do that, now I could set those clear boundaries within my relationships, clear boundaries within my relationship with my children and my friends, because now I know how to identify what it is that I'm feeling. And now I can then take the thing that I'm feeling and the way that I'm feeling and now connect that to a certain action and connect it to a certain reason that I'm feeling that way. And now I can set a boundary around that specific thing rather than it just being this way across the board kind of thing. So when I don't know when I struggle with that emotional intelligence, it's hard for me to set those emotional boundaries because shoot, when I feel a certain way, I might not even know what the heck is causing it. Right. And that's why I always say, when it comes to your emotions as a man, become an investigator. Like really start digging into why and what's causing me to feel these ways. Start asking yourself that question. Why am I feeling this way? Why is it that when she does this or when somebody does this, I feel this way? Or why is it that I respond this way? What is it about that situation, about their response that caused me to feel like this? Really boil down to it and really start digging into it. And I'm sure you're going to be surprised at some of the answers that you find. So number 10, let's wrap it on up. They may struggle with self-awareness. Now, I always say, and this is my take on self-awareness. Self-awareness is the foundation to our emotional wellness. Self-awareness is the foundation to our emotional wellness. I'm not going to get better emotionally until I'm self-aware, until I can start identifying certain things in myself in order for me to get more aware and in order for me to get better emotionally. When you think about self-awareness, because I do not know how to identify and because I may not be able to identify certain emotions and how I'm feeling, I may not understand how my actions and my words affect others. And then to take it a step further, I may not even understand how those actions and words affect myself. So this struggle with emotion or with self-awareness is usually a cause of our low emotional intelligence. Like we can't pick up on, going back to the cues. I might say something towards my kids. I might say something towards my wife and not be able to pick up on how that affected them and how that caused them to respond and react in a certain way. And so when we have this low emotional intelligence, it oftentimes causes us to have this lack of self-awareness and understanding what we're doing and how we're affecting those around us. And so as I wrap up on this, there were two key takeaways that I got from this article. Really good article. I'll make sure I'm gonna put this link down below. As we talked about this, men with low emotional intelligence, they display these 10 behaviors without realizing it. I'm gonna make sure I put that link down below. But there was two key takeaways and key points that I got out of this. Number one, 9 out of 10 of these things, when we look at this list of 10 behaviors, 9 out of 10 of them have to do with relationships. They have to do with how we interact in our relationships and how our lack of emotional intelligence impacts our relationships. And if your relationships are important to you, and they should be, because everything in life revolves around relationships, if they're important to you, then us increasing our emotional intelligence as men is crucial, because our emotional intelligence is linked to the quality of our relationships that we have with others. So if I want better relationships, I gotta increase my emotional intelligence. I gotta become a man that works on this. And let me tell you, as a man, speaking to another man, speaking to individuals that are listening out there, you can increase your emotional intelligence. Just like working out, you can throw up some weights, and over time you can build weights. I remember when I was lifting heavy, I used to do a program called a 5x5. It's called a strong lifts 5x5. And what was fascinating about this workout program was every time you go in the gym, you're only adding 2.5 pounds to every set, to every amount of weight that you're lifting. And so in the beginning, it looks like you're not making that progress, but over time, you do that for a year and a half. Before you know it, I remember before I knew it, I was throwing up like 315 3 plates on each side, squatting 350, somewhere around that. And I'm a tall, big guy as far as height, but I don't got all that mass on me like that. And so I was able to get very strong by just adding a little bit of weight at a time. And it's the same thing with our emotional intelligence. We can increase our emotional intelligence, and over time, it's going to increase our emotional maturity, and it's going to impact and make our relationships better. And the second key takeaway that I got around this is that most of these behaviors, they revolve around a lack of self-awareness, not being able to recognize how we are in any given moment, in any given situation. When I look at self-awareness, I look at self-awareness as a mental mirror that I can look into, that tells me and shows me how I'm thinking and how I'm acting and how I'm feeling in any given moment in time. And being able to pay attention to that self-awareness can teach me how I can respond in certain situations and in my relationships and in other scenarios in life. And so being able to increase our emotional intelligence will increase our self-awareness, but the self-awareness is where it has to start. We got to be aware of those things. And so if that's something that you need to improve, I'm going to link down below a video that I just did on how to increase your self-awareness with 4 easy steps. And it's going to be something that can help you to learn how to build your self-awareness, because the self-awareness it's the foundation of our emotional wellness. And when we start there, we can build on that. And so hopefully you got some value out of this live Sunday evening. We're just chilling, kicking it. Let me know down below in the comments what you think. Let me know if you got some value out of it. If you're a man, you're listening to this, maybe I want to know if maybe you've seen some of those behaviors in yourself. I'll be real with you. When I went through this list, I saw about 8 out of 10 in my own life. And I was like, oh man, I got to work on some of these things, right? So let me know down in the comments what you think, what you saw, what you see in yourself, ways that you can improve. I want to hear it all. I'll make sure I link this article down below, and I'll link anything else that I talked about in this video. But until next time, this is Nick with Life Recreated. Keep learning, keep healing, and keep growing.